If you can't be alone with yourself, you'll never be truly strong. The Stoics knew this secret that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You're afraid of being alone. You fill every quiet moment with noise. You surround yourself with people even when you don't enjoy their company. You reach for your phone the second you have nothing to do. You'll do anything to avoid sitting with yourself in silence. And this fear of solitude is exactly what's keeping you weak. The Stoics understood something that modern society has completely forgotten. Real strength only develops in solitude. You can't become who you're meant to be while you're constantly surrounded by others. And until you learn to be alone, you'll never be free. So why is being alone necessary to become strong? Because you can't hear yourself think when you're surrounded by noise. Everyone else's opinions, expectations, and energy are drowning out your own voice. You're so busy reacting to other people that you never develop your own thoughts, values, and identity. You're living a borrowed life made up of other people's ideas about who you should be. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, constantly surrounded by thousands of people, but he carved out time to be alone with his thoughts. That's when he wrote his meditations, his personal journal where he worked through his philosophy and reminded himself of Stoic principles. He understood that without solitude, he'd lose himself in the chaos of other people's demands and expectations. Here's what happens when you're never alone. You become dependent on external validation to feel okay. You need people around you to distract you from your own thoughts. You need constant stimulation to avoid facing yourself. You develop no internal strength because you've never had to rely on yourself for anything. You're like a plant that's never been outside. The moment you're alone, the moment you face any real challenge by yourself, you fall apart. Let me break down exactly why solitude builds strength. First, it forces you to face yourself. When you're alone, there's no one to perform for. No one to impress, no one to distract you. It's just you and your thoughts. And for most people, this is terrifying because they don't like what they find when they look inward. They see their insecurities, their failures, their fears, all the things they've been avoiding by staying busy and surrounded. But the Stoics knew this confrontation is necessary. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of self-examination. He said, you should set aside time every day to be alone with your thoughts, to review your actions, to question your beliefs, to understand yourself deeply. This is uncomfortable work that most people avoid their entire lives. But avoiding it means you never really know yourself, which means you can never truly be strong. When you spend time alone, you're forced to deal with the voice in your head. That voice might be critical, anxious, or depressing. Most people run from it by surrounding themselves with people and distractions, but running from it doesn't make it go away. It just means you're controlled by thoughts you haven't examined. Solitude gives you the space to hear that voice clearly, to question it, to work with it, to eventually master it. Second reason solitude builds strength is it develops self-reliance. When you're constantly around people, you outsource your emotional regulation to them. You need them to make you feel better when you're down. You need them to validate you when you're uncertain. You need their presence to feel safe and comfortable. You're dependent on external sources for your internal state. But when you're alone, you learn to provide these things for yourself. You learn to comfort yourself. You learn to validate your own choices. You learn to be okay without anyone else's input. This is real power. Epictetus taught that depending on anything outside yourself for your well-being is a form of slavery. Freedom comes from needing nothing external to be okay, and you only develop that freedom through time spent alone. Third benefit of solitude is clarity. When you're constantly surrounded by people, you're bombarded with their opinions, their problems, their energy. Your mind gets cluttered with everyone else's thoughts, and you lose touch with what you actually think and want. You make decisions based on what others will think, instead of what's actually right for you. You pursue goals that look impressive to your social circle instead of goals that genuinely matter to you. Solitude clears all that noise away. Marcus Aurelius used his alone time to think clearly about what actually mattered. Away from the demands and opinions of others, he could evaluate situations objectively. He could make decisions based on his principles rather than on pressure or expectations. This clarity is impossible to achieve when you're never alone because you're always processing other people's input instead of your own thoughts. Here's another crucial aspect. Solitude reveals who you actually are versus who you pretend to be. Around others, you wear masks. You perform a version of yourself that you think people want to see. You hide your real thoughts and feelings. You act in ways that maintain your image. But when you're alone, there's no point in pretending. The mask comes off, and what you find underneath is your real self. Most people are terrified of this. They've spent so long performing that they don't know who they really are without an audience. They've built their entire identity around how others perceive them. So being alone feels like ceasing to exist. But the Stoics knew that this performed self isn't real. Seneca wrote that you need to strip away the social roles and expectations to discover your authentic nature. And you can only do that in solitude. Let's talk about how solitude builds mental toughness. When you're alone, especially for extended periods, you face discomfort, boredom, loneliness, restlessness, the urge to distract yourself. Most people can't handle this for even an hour. They immediately reach for their phone, turn on the TV, call someone, do anything to escape the discomfort of being alone with themselves. But if you can sit with that discomfort without running from it, you develop incredible resilience. You learn that boredom won't kill you, that loneliness is temporary, that restlessness passes. You build tolerance for uncomfortable internal states, which means external circumstances can't shake you as easily. The Stoics practiced this deliberately. They would spend time in isolation not because they enjoyed it, but because it strengthened them. Epictetus talked about voluntary hardship as training. Just like physical exercise builds physical strength through controlled stress, solitude builds mental strength through controlled discomfort. You're training yourself to be okay in any situation, even when you have nothing external to rely on. This makes you unshakable because your stability comes from within. Here's something most people don't realize. Being constantly around others actually weakens you. You become dependent on their energy. You need their validation. You absorb their moods and problems. You lose your center because you're always adapting to whoever you're with. You become like a chameleon, changing colors based on your environment, but never having your own color. Marcus Aurelius understood this danger. Even though he had to be around people constantly as emperor, he maintained an internal distance. He practiced being alone mentally, even in crowds. He didn't let other people's opinions and energy control his internal state. This ability to be alone within yourself, to maintain your center regardless of who's around you, that's advanced level strength that comes from practice in actual solitude. Now let's address the fear that keeps people from being alone. You're afraid you'll discover you don't like yourself. You're afraid the silence will be unbearable. You're afraid you'll realize how empty your life actually is when you strip away all the distractions. These fears are valid, but avoiding them doesn't make them go away. It just means you're living in denial while those truths control you from the shadows. The Stoic approach is to face these fears head-on, spend time alone. If you discover you don't like yourself, that's valuable information. Now you can work on becoming someone you do like. If the silence is uncomfortable, sit with it until it becomes bearable. If your life feels empty, that's your signal to fill it with things that actually matter rather than just distractions. Solitude doesn't create these problems. It reveals them so you can address them. Here's what the Stoics really understood about solitude. You can't become strong while you're constantly influenced by others. You can't develop wisdom while you're drowning in everyone else's noise. You can't find yourself while you're always performing for an audience. Real growth, real strength, real self-knowledge, all of these require time alone. Seneca wrote that we need solitude to restore ourselves, not as an escape from life, but as preparation for it. Time alone is where you process your experiences, where you think deeply, where you reconnect with your values, where you become clear about who you are and what you want. Then you can go back into the world as a stronger, more centered person who isn't blown around by every opinion or circumstance. But most people have this backwards. They think solitude is something to avoid, and constant social connection is the goal. So they fill every moment with people and activities and stimulation. And they wonder why they feel so lost, so dependent, so unclear about who they are. It's because they've never given themselves the space to find out. Marcus Aurelius had ultimate power and unlimited access to people, but he still prioritized solitude. He knew that without it, he'd lose his center. He'd become reactive instead of thoughtful. He'd be controlled by circumstances instead of controlling himself. The time he spent alone wasn't a luxury. It was necessary maintenance for his mind and character. You need to develop a practice of solitude, not just being physically alone while scrolling on your phone. Real solitude where you're alone with your thoughts. Start small if you need to. 15 minutes a day of just sitting in silence. No phone, no TV, no music, just you and your mind. It will be uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is exactly what you need to push through. As you get more comfortable with short periods, extend them. Take walks alone without headphones. Sit in nature without your phone. Spend an evening by yourself doing nothing in particular. Eventually, try longer periods. A day alone, a weekend. These extended times in solitude are where the real transformation happens, where you work through things you've been avoiding, where you discover who you actually are underneath all the performance and distraction. The Stoics made solitude a regular practice. Seneca would retreat from social obligations regularly to think and write. Marcus Aurelius carved out time every day for reflection. Epictetus taught in a school, but also emphasized the importance of time alone for each student. They understood that you can't maintain your strength and clarity without regular solitude. Stop being afraid of being alone. Stop filling every quiet moment with noise. Stop surrounding yourself with people just to avoid facing yourself. The discomfort you're avoiding is the exact thing you need to go through to become strong. Every time you sit alone with yourself and don't run from it, you're building real strength. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else. The kind that can't be taken from you. Being alone doesn't mean you become antisocial or isolated from everyone. It means you develop a solid center that doesn't need constant external input to remain stable. It means you can enjoy people without being dependent on them. It means you can be in relationships without losing yourself. It means you have access to inner resources that make you resilient in any situation. The Stoics were connected to others, but they were never desperate for that connection. They could be alone comfortably, which meant they engaged with others from a place of strength rather than need. That's the goal. Develop such a solid relationship with yourself through solitude that you can be with others without losing yourself and be alone without falling apart.